All right, hi everyone. My name is Megan Kidd, and my chapter is chapter 8 on developmental theories. So, the definition of development, according to Zander, is defined as the orderly and sequential changes that offer with the passage of time as an organism moves from conception to death. It includes those processes that are biologically programmed within the organism. It also includes those processes by which the organism is changed or transformed through interactions with the environment. And so we move on to multiple schools of thought on personality development. We see here biology, anthropology, psychology, and sociology. In order to understand the sociological perspective on the development of personalities, it is important to acknowledge that there are many approaches to the topic as listed in the slide. So now we're looking at life stage, lifespan, and life course. The life stage theories tend to lean toward the idea that developmental stages are linked to age, and those stages are typically universal. The lifespan perspective does not see a direct link between age and behavioral development. It is also a psychological perspective, meaning it focuses solely on the individual. And lastly, the life course approach is sociological and focuses on how societal impacts affect the individual. Slide 5 is the shared assumptions on life stages, lifespan, and life course. So the 4 bullet points are showcasing 4 similarly expressed assumptions that can be tied to each of the life perspectives that we discussed in the previous slide. So the first one, quantitative and qualitative changes. In other words, physical maturation. The second one is direction of change. In other words, simple to complex. Forms of social interaction, understanding that there is a transition. Number 3 is critical age and experience. In other words, critical life events. And lastly, constancy and cumulative influence. In other words, enduring impact of childhood experiences. And then slide 6, we're actually being introduced to the first theorist of this chapter, Erik H. Erikson. He was a student of Freud's, and he was able to take Freud's 5 stages of psychosexual development, and he introduced some very important elements, key ideals that are very impactful to our personal development and instrumental. Erikson developed a new theory called the 8 stages of man, which includes societal aspects that don't negate the biological perspective that Freud initially introduced, but Erikson does add to the idea and kind of evolves them. And you can see in the slide just a few things that he touched on. Going to slide 7. So the 8 stages of man, he approached personality development and from a social standpoint versus Freud, who focused on neurosis. In other words, the individual and their genetic makeup and neurological pathways. This was totally, negating the fact that there are societal factors that impact us just as strongly, if not more. So the first stage, as you can see, it actually corresponds with Freud's oral stage in his psychosexual development in his 5 stages. And then stage 2 actually corresponds to Freud's second psychosexual development stage, which is the anal stage. Okay, and then slide 8. So the third stage is actually It actually corresponds with the third stage of Freud, which is the phallic stage. Eric says in this stage that um, this is when they start to understand, or children start to understand, the feeling of guilt and initiative. Um, the stage is pretty similar to the idea of the generalized other. Kids are taught socially how to interact, play, imagine, dress, and when a child is teased for their originality or distinct traits, they may develop a sense of guilt, which Erikson suggests can lead to overcompensation. So, um, hardy, pompous attitudes that just try to really show other people, our audience, that we're more than what they've boxed us in to be. And then stage 4 corresponds with the fourth stage in Freud's sexual development, in his five sexual development stages. And it's the latency stage. But in Erikson's 8 stages of man, the fourth stage is his psychosocial stage. This is where his theory emerges. It emphasizes the importance of social institutions such as home and school, and if the socialization associated with these institutions doesn't stick, the child is less likely to become someone of a higher social status. So, this is when Erikson really introduces the idea of a social institution and their societal impacts on an individual. And then the next slide, we're going to the last stage in Freud's psychosexual development, but also the last stage that coincides with. So, no, we are going into the last stage of the fifth stage of Erikson's 8 stages of man, but the end of Freud's psychosexual theory. And his fifth stage would be called the genital stage, which would be directly related to the puberty stage. But Erikson takes a different approach here. He takes his sociological mind and comes to the conclusion that the fifth stage occurs when children transition out of adolescence and enter into the world of adulthood. He chooses to step away from the psychological and physiological perspective and hones in on the sociological perspective that speaks to both positive and negative aspects of transitioning into new and old social aspects of their life. And so that's where we finally can break ourselves off from Freud's theory, and we go into the last 3 stages of the 8 stages of man with just Erikson and just his ideals. And the last 3, starting with 6, he begins to clarify, Erikson, just what he means when he describes an intimate partnership between 2 adults. It is the ability to remove oneself, the ego, and pair with another. Erikson felt that this categorizing by age would only complicate the progress from adolescence to adulthood. Stage 7, Erikson states that the generative trait that becomes more apparent as we process through stages of life or progress through stages of life. Generative is the responsibility and duty to inform and assist future generations. It's important to remember. These terms apply when we step outside of the generation within our reach and extend to those in need of guidance or instruction. So pretty much just being the person that says that I have the information to get you ahead in life, and I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and assist you. And stage 8, the final stage, he called it the maturity stage. And this occurs toward the end of a person's life, the latter years. The overwhelmed sense of joy that fills a person's heart when they think back over their lives and their personal experience, while another person, while it might experience shame or guilt or regret when they think about their past decisions in their own lives. Going on to slides 11, this is where we're introduced to Piaget and Piaget, cognitive development. So we turn to a new theorist to grow the topic of surrounding personality. Is John Piaget. So because I don't know how to say his name right, we're gonna say John, or Jean. Yeah, John. So John's perspective, known as genetic epistemology, is his developmental study of a child's mental development, and he felt that adaptation was part of cognitive development, and connected interaction with our environments help, and it helps us to adjust to life and its ever-changing realities. We're introduced to two dimensions of mental development. By Jean, he says that there are 6 steps detailing his idea of the two-dimensional perspective on mental development, which are intrapersonal, motor, and just to break down those 2 dimensions, they're intrapersonal, motor, or intellectual, and intrapersonal, affective, or social. And just to get started, just 3 out of the 6 steps of what we're looking at to start would be the reflexive or hereditary stage. This is the first instinctual nutritional drive, and the first emotions appear in this first stage. The second is a stage of first motor habits. So this is associated with the first organized precepts, first differentiated emotions. And then number 3 is a stage of sensory motor or practical intelligence, and this comes before language. Going on to slide 13. Number 4, the stage of intuitive intelligence or spontaneous interpersonal feelings, social relationships of cooperation between child and adult. This is typically found in youths between 2 and 7. Stage of concrete intellectual operations. This is the beginning of logic, moral, and social feelings of cooperation. And then number 6 is the stage of abstract operations. And this is where the formation of personality comes in, effective and intellectual entry into the society of adults. In other words, the transition and understanding that coincides with becoming a confident member of society. Let me see. And slide 14, which is Jean's sensory motor stage. The definition is on the slide, this is the stage in which an infant begins to understand the corresponding nature between sensations and motor behavior. And so practical knowledge implies that this is the early stage of it is the early stages of adolescence, and we begin to discover ways to operate in our world. For example, if a child starts to obtain or desires to obtain a certain object, they may find a way that is seemingly unconventional for their age to assist them in doing so, in completing their goal. A child, or for example, a child grabbing a step stool to grab snacks that are placed high and out of reach. This is also where object permanence is introduced. Okay. The conceptual stage, we're given 4 subsections before we get into the Okay. Four subsections before we get into the logistics of conceptual stages. So the four subsections are preconceptual stage, that's between the ages of 2 and 4, intuitive thought between the ages of 4 and 7, concrete logical operation, age 6 or 7, and the formal operations, age 11 or older. And the graph is on page 256 if you want to see exactly how that's laid out. And so before we move on, sorry about that, before we move on, this stage is pretty consistent with categorization for children. John suggests this stage is where children typically start to describe their toys or their environment, where it happened, how it happened, when it happened, who it happened with, and they start to place them in categories. So I was wearing a blue dress, I was wearing a pink shirt, or etc. They begin to say what's happening around them and give appropriate descriptions of what's happening. Okay, so 16, concrete logical operations. So this concept states that there are several phases that are instrumental in the development of the mind of an adolescent. So class concepts, arithmetic operations, geometric operations, temporal operations, mechanical operations, and there are a few more to list. But actually going back to, and this is piggybacking off of his, off of Jean's theory on adolescent mental development, which produces two. So this is actually the principle of conservation is actually branching off of the concrete logical operations. It refers to the idea of a child beginning to come into a true understanding of what objectification means rather than what it looks like. As an infant, the mind is almost trance-like, but as we mature, we begin to understand the world around us from a multi-dimensional outlook and construct our own interpretations of what that means. So the slide gives a very plain definition. It refers to the line of thinking that sections of the object remaining unchanged no matter what modifications are implemented. And so pretty much just understanding just because a ball of clay has changed shapes, the actual material of it, the weight of it, the color of it, those things have not changed. Therefore, the object has not changed. The next slide, we're going on to egocentricity. Egocentricity is defined as a self-centered way of thinking. And the definition actually coincides with the term ethnocentric. Ethnocentrism is the attitude that everything outside of an individual's societal perspective is abnormal or strange. Egocentric individuals will easily fall into the world of ethnocentrism based on their shared ideas and reality. But seeing as children obtain this mental pathway at such a young age, it is safe to assume that they are unaware of their behaviors. And then we're going on to formal operations and cooperation and personal autonomy. So this is where children's ability to assume the perspectives of other persons develop further in both intellectual and social dimensions of personality during the adolescent stage. So according to John, this transition from concrete thinking to abstract thinking is tied to social and affective development. So in layman terms, this is just another way to explain why our environment and why our upbringing, why our societal involvement, uninvolvement, all of those are so crucial to our development into adulthood. And so then we move into our final theorist, which is Kohlberg, and he gives his 6 stages of moral development, which is based on which is taking from Jean Piaget, from John's theory on mental development, and he builds on that, and he comes up with 6 stages of moral development. And so in stage 1, we see motives and consequences are pushed aside due to a person's action being directly linked to the reaction incited by the action. So stage 2, deciding to dismiss negative outcomes based on empathetic reasoning, or dismissing the idea that something is quote unquote wrong based on quote unquote good intentions. Stage 3, an action performed by an individual that is socially unacceptable but is absolved of moral inconsistencies because it is seen as morally correct. In stage 4, the reality that what is wrong is obvious, and no matter the intention, it is morally corrupt to do something against societal norms. Stage 5, the ends do not justify the mean. In other words, the rejected means and rejected goals leave a person in a state of retreatism, which allows a person to justify why they felt that their need was more important than adhering to societal norms. And at the last stage, this is the stage of choosing defiance or conformity. Although good intentions cannot change the nature of a situation, whether morally correct or not, there is still a choice to be made: conform and suffer, or deviate and hope for the best. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.